the feeling of hopelessness, dehumanization, and just doubting yourself, and that's all based on the color of your skin and not who you are. With what's going on, we have a great opportunity with the momentum that's being gathered around anti-racism, where we can really affect and really create change now. What we're seeing at the moment is a hangover from colonialism and empire. The structures and narratives that we've put in place, we have to break down. And with what's going on, we really have that opportunity. I don't know about you guys, but I think what happened in Bristol is a massive symbolic moment with that going down, and then what's happened with other statues. So what we are planning to do today is, rather than talk about this from an academic point of view, rather than talk about CRT theories or anything like that, we want to talk about lived experiences and how we can move forward and what we can do collectively as a community to come together and try to break what's going on. And, I, for one, believe there's a revolution about to happen. So, power to the people and all that. But right, Alice, can you introduce the awesome panelists?
Yeah, do you want to give yourself a quick intro? Just say where you are based and...
I'm Omar, I'm a techie. There you go.
Cool, so I'm Alice, I'm not a techie. I run a company called Dark Coffee. So we talk about mental health, wellbeing and business together. And we're here with our lovely panel today who've agreed to share their lived experience, their expertise, and just, talk to us very openly. So thank you already for this panel. Rather than me introduce me, I just wanted you to spend maybe 30 seconds introducing yourselves to everybody. So Valentina, can we come to you first? I'll unmute you.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Alice. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Valentina Hines, and I'm co-owner of SVH Inc., which is a well-being and happiness in the workplace company. And what we do is we create events that are away days to boost the team's happiness and productivity. And this is one that I'm very passionate about because racism has a lot to do with our happiness and well-being as a people, and as we progress you'll see how.
Perfect. Thank you, Valentina. Thank you. Omar?
Hello everybody, I'm Omar Javid. I'm the founder of Occult Jobs. We are a recruitment platform focused on diversity and inclusion by anonymizing CVs and removing unconscious bias out of the process. In addition to that, I'm a corporate trainer with Ono, and we go into organizations, deliver diversity and inclusion training, primarily to teams who traditionally wouldn't be involved in or sold on the benefits of diversity and inclusion.
Perfect, thank you, Omar. And finally, Anthony.
Hey guys, I'll try to keep it 30 seconds. I'm an entrepreneur, guys. I run a company, a holding company called E1B2 Brands, which encompasses and houses a lot of different products, services, and offerings to improve the world of work. E1B2 stands for Employees First, Business Second. So my entire life is really being dedicated to making sure employees, from the employee experience perspective, are really being appreciated and being taken care of. There's a lot of interesting things coming up here that I'm excited about, and it's an honor to be on today's chat.
Thank you so much for joining us. Just a point that I wanted to make before we carry on, guys, we are recording this and we're saving a copy of it. We'll be uploading a full version of the event to YouTube after the event. So the reason we asked you to sign up for a follow-up email after today is that we will be sending you a link for that. So if you want to watch it back or share it with your network, please feel free to do so. We want this conversation to reach more people so that other people can benefit from it as well. And we will be using it potentially in marketing and things going forward as well, just to pick up on some of the key points. So if you don't want to be featured, please feel free to put your camera off, but I just wanted to make you aware of that before we carry on. Okay, guys, thank you so much for offering to be involved in the discussion today. I think I want to start off by just acknowledging the problem and how it affects us day to day first. And then as the discussion moves on, we'll go on to talk about solutions a bit later. So Valentina, I'll come to you first. Could you just let us know, firstly, how you are, and secondly, how you found the last couple of weeks and everything that we've seen? It's been absolutely extraordinary. How has it been for you?
It's been bonkers, I have to say. Yeah, it has been bonkers. I have found myself reeling from emotion to emotion. It's like a ping pong. And at first I thought when coronavirus lockdown started, I thought that was a real maelstrom of emotions, but it's been nothing compared to how I feel this period. I've gone from feeling okay to feeling feisty to feeling very depressed to feeling very inspired. And I just can't actually describe how I felt all through these periods. And no, it's all these buried emotions coming out, all these feelings, these thoughts, these, I can't quite explain it except for if you've been through a kind of abuse or you've lived our kind of experiences, then you would understand what it feels like to have to be forced to relieve this. But while I feel this way, I'm also quite exhilarated, especially with the bringing down of the statue in Bristol. It's like, that's, like Amar said, a turning point. It is a defining moment for us because this is not a conversation that's going to just go away. No, it's not going away. Yes, it's going to stay. And sorry to flatter, but I was speaking to a friend today and she said, oh, this whole thing makes me uncomfortable. And I said, it's meant to make you uncomfortable. And if you're uncomfortable because we say Black Lives Matter, then you should really be uncomfortable, because when we talk about diversity, really, we talk about things like Asians, we talk about different ethnicities, but you never mention the Black person. It's like the Black person is invisible. We've got this thing, but she said, I see you and you're everywhere. And I say, yes, but you don't really see us. It's like the servant who you need when you need something. Aside from that, you don't remember. And that's just to give you a hint of how it's felt, all these things coming through.
Thank you. Yeah, I can understand the complexity of it, and just, yeah, the maelstrom, I think, is a beautiful way of putting it. Omar, how about for you? How have you found things the last couple of weeks?
When the news first came out and the protests started, I just assumed that there'll be a few protests and we'll be back to business as usual. But it feels like, I think with everything going on with coronavirus, it created more anger, and we have the potential to see real change. The significance of the bringing down of the statue was, for me, an admittance that Britain does have its racism problem, which isn't overt, it's a covert racism that it has. And bringing down the statue was an acceptance that white people in particular are accepting the fact that there is a racism problem in Britain, which people of colour have known. I've known it all pretty much all my life, that there is a racism problem out there. So for me, it was significant, the coming down of the statue, and now I'm really excited and interested to see if there is any real structural change to our institutions. So
And
inspired now after being quite passive about it, I guess, last week.
Yeah, I think you were quite cynical the last time I spoke to you last week, and that's really good. I think it was particularly poignant in the video I saw that it was a white person who was like putting the ropes over, and it was like a combination of white and black people together pulling it down. I thought that was particularly poignant. Anthony, how about you? Yeah, Anthony, different experience from us, I'm sure, in the US. How are things over there with you?
Yeah, I was going to say I've kind of been I feel a little out of the box here because a lot of the references and examples and terminology is kind of seems like it's on that coast. So I feel a couple things. I've been recently dealing with a lot of difficult conversations with my mother, friends, people, and we talked about this offline, Alice, as far as I come at this from a little bit of a different angle than a lot of people will probably typically expect. And so we'll unpack that. So there's been a lot of confusion there, a lot of frustration there, a lot of sadness there. I've been feeling a lot of empathy for a lot of different people, but most importantly, feeling a lot of empathy for, my people of color. And then, and I don't actually want to be the Debbie Downer, but I like to go deep into like psychology and neuroscience and kind of unpacking humans. And if I have to be completely honest, I'm not sure what's happening on again, where you guys are, but here in America, there's a lot of big brands that I think are, I'm trying to find the ways to politically say this, that are taking a stand for PR. I think my gut tells me that. My gut really tells me that. I like what I'm seeing, and I've been told by my mother and others to appreciate and be happy for what is happening. But if I listen to my gut, and my gut usually is right, I think we wake up in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we see a lot of the influencers, the big time people, as well as the bigger brands, unfortunately reverting back to the same actions. So I do not want to be the guy in the room that is completely opposite, but I have to tell you guys my truth about what I'm just seeing on my side of the water here and what I'm seeing. And a lot of big brands and a lot of big people like influencers and celebrities and just people in all different types of walk of life are using this, unfortunately, as a PR leveraged move, which is not fun to see. So I don't want to bring any sadness, but that is my truth, if I'm being very honest with you guys.
And I think that's a really valid point to make. And when we move on to thinking about how we can be proactively anti-racist and keep the discussion going forward, I think we're likely to encounter a lot more of that, because I think you're right, we're already seeing it, but going forwards, I think it will separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of who is actually genuinely trying to cause systemic change or who is just doing it to jump on a hashtag and things like that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the problem. So when we advertised this event, we wanted to pick up on white privilege specifically and where these problems come from. Valentina, can I come to you first? What is white privilege and how does it manifest, do you think?
Okay, this is where a lot of white people, sorry to say, have an issue, because those who are actively or passively anti-racist have never actually confronted the fact that they have and they exercise unknowingly this thing called white privilege. And so I will give you a few instances from my life. And one of them is rent. So you want to rent somewhere and you are obviously Black. And while I haven't had the experience of some of my friends who go to a place to rent and they see they're Black and suddenly the story changes to, oh, we're sorry, children are not allowed here, when that wasn't what was said on the phone or agreed on the phone, or suddenly the rent's gone up, or suddenly it's no longer available. What I've had to deal with are things like, which you can say it's legal, but I've had to deal with things like, can we see your passport? And the first time this happened to me, I had my passport with the Home Office. And I said, my passport is with the Home Office, but I can send you my passport copy, which the other letting agent has, and it's been signed by them because they did see it. And you could also write the Home Office to find out if I am a legal person here. And they said, fine, that was fine with them. And then we went back and forth a lot, but I think one of the reasons they couldn't really push us out was we were offering a full year's rent and not 6 months or 3 months. So it was full year upfront. And there were things that the agent had to tell the landlord to do, which they didn't. And we paid the rent. And it was time to move in, but we hadn't moved in, and we just called to find out if things were in place. And she said, no, they're not in place. And said, why? Because we're moving in tomorrow, but these were conditions which we agreed to. And the next thing I hear is, well, we've really moved heaven and earth for you. Have we seen your passport? Can you bring your passport in now? And at this point, I'm like, wait, back up, wait a minute. You've taken my money. You've gotten communication from the Home Office saying this person is allowed to rent, but simply because you've seen a petition on the news from us saying to the Home Office, well, you've got to allow my family stay together and not deport me, is that any reason for you to bring that in? And that's, I mean, if you, Alice, were in that position, can you actually imagine yourself in that position? No. So that's an insane example of white privilege. And then there are cases where you walk into a place and this is now as a mom, and there are moms with their children, and my son is mixed, and you see the moms talking to each other, even those who they don't know. Some of them give it a token, hello, how are you doing? And a little chat, but then ultimately they abandon you. So you're left sitting there feeling like this sore thumb sticking out, and you're questioning yourself because you know you're not an unfriendly person. You're not a scary person. You don't look scary, but why are they not relating or interacting with you? And the only time they would ever say a word to you is if their child is talking to my child. And that's it. They don't realize they're being racist, but there's this barrier that I can't get through.
So you feel like there's a clear discrimination in the way that people treat you in instances like that?
Oh, absolutely. In every aspect. I'm very fortunate to have some great friends who are like champions and who try their best to not make me feel that way. But it's also the fact that you realize that you have to work doubly hard to prove yourself. So there's this assumption that because you're Black, you either can't speak English, or you are not intelligent, or you don't even understand what civilization is. I have to say, I am really, if I would start a petition sometime soon to stop these charities from doing what they do by portraying Africa and Africans as these desperate people in need of saving by the white population with their £1 or $1. And that's not what we need. It's not the reality. So people see me and they say, oh, so you have been drinking from the same lake or the same river as monkeys, and you live in a hut.
Wow.
And at first it's like, what are you talking about? Then you start to see it on TV and you're like, fuck that, excuse me. But that's what they see. And that's white privilege. I mean, there's poverty in the UK, there's poverty in the US, but do they ever portray it? No, they will never do that. It's got to be the Black person.
Yeah, it's that kind of racial stereotyping that's very prevalent, isn't it, in the UK? And I agree with what you're saying about the representation in charities specifically is quite problematic. But maybe later we'll go on to talk about racial representations in the media overall. That would be a really good theme to come back to. Omar, can I come to you as well? Let's talk about white privilege and how, have you got any kind of personal insights and lived experiences you could share with us?
Yes, so I guess the first thing to say is the lived experiences of people of colour in this country are very different to the lived experiences of people who are white. And that's not to say, and the common misconception is when we say that, we're not saying that white people didn't work hard to get to where they've got to in life. What we're saying is that their race or their skin colour was not a barrier to them achieving that. And it starts from a young age, you know, from my personal point of view. I used to get in quite a bit of trouble in primary school, and it's just something really, really simple. And with regards to eye contact with the teacher, in my environment where I grew up, you wouldn't make eye contact with someone older than you. It was seen as a disrespect. When I went to school, I used to get into detention because I never used to enjoy making eye contact with teachers who I saw it out of respect, but it was actually punished. And that can be seen throughout the education system. Kissing off the teeth, for example, with children. You know, there's a school in, I think, down south where they give a automatic 2-hour detention for a child that kisses their teeth, and that's going to be very, very specifically targeted to Black people. You know, and the experience goes across society. So you've got the education system, then you've got employment, where if a Muslim name if you add a Muslim name onto a CV and send it off for an application, is 4 times less likely to receive a positive response than a white name using the exact same CV.
Wow.
And I found that when I've been looking for employment, and that's one of the reasons that I started OCL. Another example is working within large organizations. What we found with people with African sounding names don't get to an interview stage as quicker as people with white sounding names. And just following on from that, obviously experiencing the overt racism is something that is actually difficult, but I've learned to deal with quite easily. It's more the covert racism that we have throughout the structures in the society and the white privilege, which is a fight that I think we've been always losing until now, and that's where I'm hoping we see a turning point now.
Yeah, let's come to you, Anthony, because I think one of the main differences between the US and the UK culture is that I think with the UK it is more sort of covert and underlying racism that we see here, whereas in the US, just from the outside, I have to say, it seems like it's more over there. Is that kind of your lived experience of it? Is it very obvious? Does it feel like it's very close to the surface? Or is it maybe the media's representation at the moment that makes us think that way?
Yeah, so again, I'm going to throw everybody off, but I'll meet you guys at a certain point that I think we all can agree with. So I'll start with the out-of-the-box perspective. Very, very brief background, guys. And I believe I told you about this, Alice, as well, offline. Grew up half of my life, or maybe I didn't. Grew up half of my life in a very wealthy area, predominantly all Caucasian. Mother to this day won't tell me what happened in her personal finance situation, job-wise. Won't tell me, doesn't want to talk about it. But at 14, we went from that environment, and then we moved into an inner city where it was all different races that you could think of. On both sides of the spectrum, I personally, to this day, almost 30 years on this earth, I personally have never experienced anything that was racial. Obviously, in my face, racial. My mother raised me to see no color, to see people, to hear voices, to understand and unpack perspectives, and have empathy for all people. And that's how I've carried my life. And again, I know that during these times, it's incredibly controversial and out of the box to hear a person of color say that. And frankly, if we're being honest, I wish more people of color would have experienced something that I've experienced, which is I've never dealt a day in my life with anything that I would deem as racist. Now, to flip that around a bit, though, as it pertains to white privilege throughout my life, right? I definitely saw that. And again, when I say racist, I'm talking obviously in the face, right? So now I'm going to meet you guys here. I remember instances, and I would be sent to a camp where it was, let's call it 500 kids. 487 of them were white. And I would remember instances where there were positive type aspects of racial profiling, if you want to call it that, right? They would pick players to play the basketball game or the football game, and I would immediately get picked first, correct? Like that's, there would be instances where they would, groups of kids will huddle up and have certain conversations around certain aspects of life that you would assume, more the white areas of people would understand. And I was not introduced to be into those conversations, or I would speak up and say something and I wouldn't be recognized or heard. So under the surface, there were moments now, being 29, 30 years old, I can look back and say, that was a little odd to me. That was a little bit of a, you're assuming type of a situation. Let's flip to me being a little bit older now in the workplace and just living life. As it pertains to what you were saying, Omar, about job interviews and looking at different applicants and things of that nature, that is incredibly a real thing that unfortunately, we have to go through, and white people do not have to go through. If your name, no offense to you, Alice, if your name is Alice or Sarah or if your name is David, or if your name is, you know, what are some other things? John, you know, these very typical names that you see come across, unfortunately, and we can talk about this at another date, the psychology, the neuroscience, the patterns that these individuals have, the sick perspectives, honestly, these individuals have, and the preconceived notions and perspectives they have on these names. They assume those people are going to come in and have personality traits, ways of talking, ways of working that won't blend in with the people that we have here. I have witnessed that. And again, I haven't personally been affected by that, but I have been on the board or an advisor to a company or an executive where I saw fellow executives that were white make those preconceived notions. And I spoke up immediately. And when I spoke up, they said, oh, they did this. They're like, oh, of course, like we're going to hire some black people. Don't worry. Or we're going to make sure people of color are here. And again, going back to the way I was brought up, I said, guys, this isn't a black thing for me. This is, I just need you to pick the best person, ignore color, and just don't make any preconceived notions based off of a name and based off of what you assume their voice is going to sound like, or their slang usage, or the way that they're going to dress, and assuming they're not going to fit into this culture. Because the last time I checked, we don't want everybody in this culture to talk and walk the exact same. So that's a whole thing in itself. But again, I empathize with any African-American that has dealt with something that is directly racist in their face. Fortunately for me, and my mother even said this, she's like, I'm thankful that you never had to deal with anything like that. I personally haven't. But now looking back when I was younger and now being older, I now see some of the undertones and some of the subconscious behaviors that I am not a fan of at all. And I know for a fact it's white privilege. Like, their perspectives of that white person happens to be intelligent, competent, smart, you know, interesting, can get the job done, productive, responsible. And so they don't always look at us in that way. And that's unfortunate. So
yeah, I think that's so true. It seems to be that there are, I think the word that you used there was assumptions, and that seems to be quite a damning thing across all of our cultures, really, is the assumptions that we make on people purely based on their race, is it comes with a set of traits and characteristics that our brains kind of shortcut that understanding. And that's where this kind of covert racism comes in. And I think this is why a lot of white people would not consider themselves racist, because we can't say we've done anything obvious and overt to kind of be discriminatory to people. But what you've said there, Anthony, is really interesting, and I think that's what a lot of people are kind of waking up to in the wake of this discussion. Yeah. Another interesting thing you said was about how you were brought up not to see color. And speaking as a white person, my lived experience is that I was not taught about my whiteness and what being white means. And I think that's one of the things that keeps covert racism going in the UK. And a few of you guys that are on the call who are white with mixed children have described to me that you made a point of discussing race with them as a result of having children with dual heritage. Valentina, I'm wondering, you said before that your kids are mixed race as well. So have you actually sat down and had discussions about race, or is it something that they've picked up at all? What's your experience of parenting been like?
Well, my eldest is 4, and he's had a lot of experience with racism. And for instance, from when he was about 1, which is when we moved to the UK, he would get hit on at the playground, and kids would bully him and push him around, and wouldn't, if he was playing with a ball, they would go there and take it from him. Even on birthday, he had a little boy punching him at the soft play area, and it was his birthday party. That's my son's birthday party. And he's come to me and said, well, Mummy, this friend of mine said he hates my skin because I'm brown. But I'm not brown, am I? I am white, like Daddy. But you're black. And, I have to then start teaching skin tones. But at what point, at what stage do you teach a 4-year-old what race is? It's hard. I don't know how to say to a 4-year-old, look, listen, Mommy's African, daddy is white because he's white British, and so you are both. I've tried to say that. I've tried to say I'm Nigerian and that is British, but that just goes. I don't understand that. I can't quite talk to him about race because my lived experiences are going to be very different from his lived experiences because I am completely black while he is mixed. And he says things like, why don't they like to play with me? And he's the most fun, friendly little boy you can ever meet. And so it's heartbreaking when a little boy says that to you. And you know that children have a thing of fantasizing things like this. But what child would fantasize someone saying to him, I hate your color because you're brown? And it's heartbreaking to think about 3-year-olds, because that's how old he was when this conversation happened. It's heartbreaking to think of 3-year-olds saying that to one another. And so it started that young. And then the covert racism of not wanting to play with him, but wanting to play with others and just say, you're my best friend. No, you are not my best friend. It starts there. And he starts to notice that some people play with me when there's no one around, and sometimes they just won't play with me. And so how do I introduce that to him? That's where I'm at. So at the moment, I'm just introducing him to books that talk about us. I try and talk about my family. He's been back to Nigeria, and he's starting to understand that there's such a thing as color. But race, I don't know how to have that conversation with a 4-year-old.
And it's shocking that you should have to, and that it's picked up on as a problem with small kids, because you always think kids don't really notice race and things like that, and points of difference. They tend to notice how we're all the same. So yeah, I completely understand. Like, thank you for being so honest about your experiences of kind of going through it. Omar, I wanted to ask you a slightly different question, because we had a sort of pre-discussion on Monday, and you were talking about the term BAME that we use in the UK, so Black and minority ethnicities. And we were talking about the different ways that we talk about different races, because obviously we're talking about Black Lives Matter and specifically Blackness at this moment in time. But you made some really interesting points about how, by using the term BAME, we kind of clump everyone that's non-white together. Would you like to talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so I've been guilty of it as well. When I go out to organisations, I'm talking about BAME, and this is, defining what's best for BAME and implementing practices based on that. But the reality is, my experience as someone who is Pakistani heritage, South Asian, I've never had a fear of the police. That's not something that's in my psyche. It's not something that I've been brought up with, and I don't have that that element to it. But then a number of my Black friends do. So what I did last week was I went on a bit of a journey and started looking into a lot of the BAME organisations, or organisations that represent BAME, and a lot of the leadership in them organisations was South Asian. And I felt it was really important to allow Black people and people with, the leaders in the Black industries come to the front. And I know it's, people who are linked to me on LinkedIn, I've been very, very quiet this last week. So it has been a learning exercise for me as well, because even within the BAME community, between Asians and Blacks, there is a racism element there. And between Black and Black, Asian and Asian, there are elements of racism dependent on your skin color, and you do get treated differently within the different races as well. So I think it's important from a BAME community, people who represent BAME, and I know Omar doesn't like the term, but people who work in that community, we need to now be more mindful that there are other voices. Me as a Pakistani South Asian, I don't represent every person of color, and I can't continue to act in that way. I need to be more inclusive within my group to make sure that we're fully representing anyone. And I'm on that journey at the moment, and we're bringing more and more people in, and having more and more of these conversations. But I think it is also important to note that it's not just white people versus people of color. It's people of color are having their own discussions within their groups now. For example, one of the big conversations that's happening at the moment is the use of the word Black in Urdu. And is it a derogatory term? And we've not come to terms with that yet, and we're currently going through that process. I'm not going to say it because I I don't know if we've decided.
What's the term?
Gala.
What is it?
Gala, and all it means is black, but it has been traditionally used in quite a derogatory way. So do we then stop using that, and do we have an alternative word for that? So, you know, just letting everyone know that these conversations are happening within our households, within these communities as well, and it's everyone. Everyone needs to look at themselves and self-reflect.
And I think we need to, I like that we're having such a big group discussion today about race, because it typically is something that happens, I don't know, I feel like it happens within communities, like you said there, like within the Asian community, you're having your own discussions and stuff. And, you know, myself as a white person, I know I'm talking with a lot of my white friends about our kind of opinions on it. But actually, it's really interesting when we open it up across races and share experiences and share insights and stuff, because that really helps foster understanding.
And in addition, sorry, Alice, just in addition to that, there's another huge conversation going on between Black people's experience as Muslims as well, where they're getting treated differently as well. So, you know, so I'm dealing with it from two angles, from the South Asian point of view, but also from a Muslim point of view. You know, and in both areas, there's a lot of work that we need to do. So.
And it's so intersectional, isn't it? We've spoken about, you know, even experiences within one racial community, women will be treated differently from the men typically. So there's kind of that element to discuss as well. And then also it comes into issues around poverty and affluence and things like that. Because traditionally, when we were talking about implicit racism, typically non-white communities have been put in places where they don't have access to as good education and things, and then that kind of systemically causes more problems going on. Anthony, I want to come back to you, because you had some really fascinating insights into how you discuss race with your mother specifically, and how you've been having conversations about race. I wonder if you could share some of the discussions that you've been having and how you found it.
Yeah, they've been really difficult, guys, because, you know, I think the theme here is I'm kind of on an island here. To be very frank, you know, I'm on an island with a lot of my friends here right now, because I'll be very transparent actually here. There was a really tough moment me and my mom had where she slipped up and actually made a mistake. She's like, I made a mistake on the way I raised you, and that's a big statement that doesn't hit home well. Because she feels like, due to what's happening right now, she made a mistake that I see people for who they are and see all colors. And she was trying to say that the way that I was articulating my points was that I was on this all lives movement. And I tried to find so many different ways to articulate it to her. And to this day, it's still not fully hitting home yet. Because, you know, statements like all lives matter, that's a trigger. Right? One thing that I've learned throughout my work is you stay away from trigger words. You can have a difference of opinion, but you stay away from words that are clearly disrespectful or clearly uncomfortable for the other party. And so I've never used that word, but she was making assumptions of my points of views of just really looking at all colors. And for me, the conversations we were having was really about deep into the psychology level, deep into the neuroscience level, and finding the organizations, whether it's the nonprofits or the for-profits or these celebrities or these influencers. And I was trying to explain to my mother, I said, I hear you, Mom. And I'm so happy that I'm seeing all walks of life joining together to make this initiative a big focus. But I said, and I said this, so I said, but what's going to happen in 6 weeks? What's going to happen in 12 weeks? What's going to happen in 18 months here? I said, what I'm talking about, Mom, is why aren't we finding organizations, initiatives, ways to unpack why these people are racist in an empathetic way? I said, Mom, you're angry and you deserve to be angry. You're upset and you deserve to be upset. But the way that you raised me to see people for who they are. And what I'm seeing right now, and it got a little bit of emotional, and I won't get emotional now, but what I said is, the way that I'm seeing it now, I'm seeing sick people. I'm seeing brains that are confused, and they don't even consciously realize they're confused. I said, Mom, I'm seeing information locked in their subconscious right now that they don't even know why it's there. Whether it was their grandfather, their father, a few internships, their parents, somehow, some way, these cops, these individuals that are Caucasian or other races that don't like Black people, because let's be clear about here. it's not just white people that have issues with Black African Americans here. I know people of all races that have problems. It seems as though a lot of fingers are being pointed at just African Americans from, let's call it what it is, a lot of different races as well. And what I said to her, Mom, is, and I said, Mom, do you have empathy for people that are going through that? She's like, no. She's like, they can deal with 10 years of issues. They can deal with that. We've dealt with 400 years. And I said, Mom, you know, I love you so much, but that's not the way you raised me. And then that's when she said, well, maybe I made a mistake on the way that I brought you up. And that really hurt, because I have a big heart, and the way that I think this is really going to change is we need to systematically unpack why people are the way they are, instead of what I'm seeing at a macro level, which is simply attacking. And I don't want people to attack anyone. I don't want African Americans that stop doing what they're doing. I don't want Caucasians that are joining African Americans to stop doing what they're doing. But what I want us to more or less do is go home, talk to your mother, talk to your grandfather, have them recall conversations with their family members, and let's unpack. And that's all I asked my mom. I said, let's actually unpack. I said, Mom, you unpack why you raised me the way that you did. And she started to do that. She was like, you know what? You are right. Because my mom's biracial. My mom's mixed. My mom's Italian and she's Black. And she's like, you know what? I was raised that way as well. And that's why I raised you. And I said, exactly. I said, that was what you knew. And so I guess I'll end it here. The controversial relationship I've been having with my mother, and as well as a lot of other friends, is people are getting angry at me because I'm finding it in my heart to have empathy and love for those. I'm taking, they said this to me, I'm taking the Martin Luther King approach rather than the Malcolm X approach. That's what my mom tried to coin it as. You're taking the love everyone, give everyone flowers and roses, and sit down and try to unpack things, instead of the blunt force and direct nature that my mom is really taking. And so I don't know where that puts me. I hope I don't get bashed here in the comments here. I
don't think anyone's going to bash you for that, but thank you for sharing your unique point of view, because I think there's in the recent discussions in the past week, I think there seemed to be a lot more anger than empathy in the first few days, and then over the past couple of weeks, I think it's kind of, I don't want to say it's softened at all, but I can see the empathy coming through a bit stronger now, of people saying, what can we do? How can we move forward? So I wanted to kind of come on to that point next. We're going to go on to questions in just a second. But for you guys going forwards, if we want to be actively anti-racist, what kind of things can we be doing? So Anthony, you made a good point there about educating ourselves and having open discussions and understanding where racism comes from. What else can all of us be doing? And I mean all of us collectively, you know, in our racial groups, but also just general points. What other things do you think we could do moving forwards from here?
Is this open to the?
Yeah, I wanted. Sorry, Anthony, do you want to carry on with?
Yeah, I'll make one quick point and then I'll toss it to someone for sure. You know, I really think because I do believe it starts in the silo of your race. I meet my mom there. I do believe, number one, African Americans are getting completely targeted. That is completely obvious. The data proves that. Number two, I do believe it takes a Caucasian mother, a Caucasian father to sit down over a cup of tea, to sit down over a nice drink or cocktail that will loosen them up a bit, and have them both really just be honest with themselves. Ask the question of, where does my clearly obvious or even subconscious perspectives of African Americans, where does it come from? And don't be afraid of the ugly truth that comes out when you say that. Be open, be honest, be candid and live into that truth. I look at it very much like the way they've designed to help drug addicts get off of drugs, alcoholism. I look at it very similar to that type of a consulting psychology way of going about the work. Every person that is in this conversation should sit down with their significant others or their family members or their parents if they still can, and truly ask themselves a couple questions of, where does this come from? Why do I feel this way? And objectively ask yourself the truth, if you're right or if you're wrong. And if you feel that you're right, keep asking the question of why you feel that you're right. of being racist or being uncomfortable with other colors, and try to recall certain circumstances that led you to believe that. Because the brain is a blank canvas. The brain, there's so much data that proves the brain is a blank canvas. No one in this world comes into this world with any data uploaded. It's blank. And so someone put that in your head. Someone put that in your head that African Americans are ignorant, African Americans are loud, African Americans are angry, African Americans are not as intelligent. Somewhere, somehow, it went in your head. So, I guess I'll leave it like this. I think everybody should go to their husband, their wife, their kids, their family members, and in silos have those, because those conversations are going to be uncomfortable. Like, you're not going to get on a Zoom call or go out to the world on a LinkedIn message or tweet to do that. That is a moment where you sit down over a nice 3-4 hour conversation to unpack it. And then that's where I think the change really starts in your own individual areas of life. So
I love that idea. I think you're so right to make it an extended and important conversation and one that you kind of reflect on away from public view as well. That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Tell yourself the truth. Don't be afraid of the ugly truth. Do not be afraid of it, because if you have 1% of racism in your body, it's okay for right now, because at least you're taking the step to start changing. Because before, you didn't even want to have the conversation and you were okay with being racist. So I'll go ahead, Valentina. I'm sorry.
Don't apologize. Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah.
Go on, Valentina.
Okay. No need to apologize. I just wanted to know who Alice was asking.
Yeah.
So I've had a peek at the chat and I've seen a few questions on how to address subconscious bias, which closely marries to your question. And I'll start first by saying that subconscious bias is kind of like a habit. It's something you do subconsciously. It just happens. You don't have to think about it, but it happens. And the best way to address this is by immersion. Now, a lot of people in the Black community, some are for saying what you can do, and some are against it. And I think generally the argument is we can't prescribe to you what to do. You have to do your own research. But I'm of the school of thought that you can't help a person if you don't give the person all the options available. And I use this analogy when speaking to you earlier, Alice, and I said this. For example, you say to someone, you're very fat and you need to lose weight. Otherwise, you're going to get diabetes, a heart attack in so time, and you die. And the person says, oh my goodness, what am I supposed to do then? And you offer suggestions and say, well, it's up to you to pick what it is you think you can do. And that's where I come with. For example, to immerse yourself, you could start by reading. And first ask yourself, how many books have you read by someone of color? And even if it wasn't written by someone of color, did it talk about someone of color? And in what way did it talk about this person of color? Did it talk about this person in a discriminatory way, or did it just present the fact? Now, after reading, you could also immerse yourself by actually going deliberately out of your way to befriend a person of color. And when I say befriend, I don't mean that very British thing of saying, hello, you okay? All right. Oh, you just give me a call if you need some help. That's not what I mean. I mean, actually going out of your way. Actually going out of your way to befriend someone honestly and genuinely care about a person. Because when you have a friend, when you consider a person a friend, you consider that person to be a part of you. You're much more attuned to how that person feels, and you're much more likely to want to help this person. And you're much more tuned to the bias and discrimination this person will be facing because you are a friend. Now, like I've said, go out of your way. It's quite hard because the other person, the person of color, might have barriers up thinking, why are you trying to befriend me? And are you actually being honest about it? But it's something you have to cultivate mindfully, just like you do when you're trying to befriend a fellow Caucasian, befriend a person of color, get to understand them, get to know their history. And all our history isn't about slavery. It isn't about colonialism. That's our far history. We're talking about our very present history. So try and get to know those things. And secondly, for our little children, our books that we read at bedtime, it's all about white children. A child doesn't get to see, a person of color doesn't get to see someone else. It's just white children. And why would you then want to befriend someone who you haven't even read about? If I can't read about you, if I can't see you on the television, then there must be something wrong with you. And instinctively, you don't want to relate and interact with that person.
What's wrong? Can everybody make sure they've got their mute on, please? Thank you very much.
Yes, so try and go out of your way again to get some great books from authors who are people of color, or books that talk about children of color, and not that tokenism, not the one where we've just put the random Black person in and so that's there, but you actually have to understand and read about these people, get to know them, and then you'll start to understand that Africa is not a country, it's a continent. Also, another thing that you can do and examine looking at is podcasts as an adult. Read, listen to people, get podcasts from people of color, expand your horizon. It's a big, huge world out there. And we people of color don't have to be burdened by just aspiring to be blue-eyed and blonde, or brown-haired and green-eyed, and all of that romanticized version. You can also watch and listen. It really gets to me when a person says, oh, I saw this and it was just people going out in all of their glory, and that is how the world should be. And I'm thinking, no, actually, in Africa, we don't actually run around naked. I mean, there are little pockets in Africa that still hold and cherish their tradition, but it's not like that for the whole of Africa. So go out of your way and cultivate these little things. And that's a way you can subconsciously fight the subconscious.
Yeah, try to actively find representation that's more inclusive rather than just, tokenism, like you said.
Cool, right, let's go to Q&A. Quite a few questions coming in, quite a few around tokenism, but Emma Beard, you've got something that you want to ask, fire away.
Yeah, I did. I apologise if this has already been asked and answered. I feel like it has. But this is a question myself and my girlfriend have been exploring all week, and she's actually done a great deal in educating me on my own subconscious biases. And over the last 12 months, I feel like I have been proactively, as Valentina has alluded to, try to learn about these subconscious biases that I have and the privilege that I've grown up with that I haven't been aware of. I always used to say, well, I don't see colour, I don't see disabilities, I don't see people as gay or straight. But the truth is, that's probably not the way to be. And I think it's more to acknowledge that there are differences between us and differences in how people are treated. So I want to thank the panelists today for coming on and helping me on my journey to educate myself as well. And I found the whole thing so interesting and helpful, and I cannot thank you enough for that. So again, I'm sorry if this has been asked and answered, but I really want to know, aside from going to the protests and putting our viewpoints across on social media, informed viewpoints, because I'm not the type of person to shout about something I don't know much about, or having discussions in our direct friendship groups and with our family, what else do you think anybody can do to ensure a true and long-lasting positive change happen with regards to ending social and systematic racism? Because I feel like at the moment isn't enough, and I really want to play a part in making sure this momentum isn't lost. I want to see a long-lasting social and systemic change. So if anybody has any ideas about that and other things that we can do, then I'd love to know about them as well.
Can I take this, Alice, please?
Sorry, I was saying yes, of course you can, please do.
Thank you, Emma. First up, thank you for really stepping up and speaking out and having this introspection. And some of the ways that we can push this conversation further, like I've said, trying to fight this subconscious by doing these other things, but you could also try and patronize Black-owned businesses, businesses owned by people of color without any bias. Try and buy their books, try and eat their food, try and celebrate their cultures, try and actually, if this business is owned by a person of color, don't feel, oh goodness, I don't want to go there. There'll be a bunch of, but step out of your way and go there. And I say this because I run a dance class, and I used to, before Corona came on, I used to deal with some parents coming in and they're like, you know, that thing, but I was the only one running a dance class like that wasn't for children. But I still got that very covert racism from a lot of people, and it started to die. It really just started to die out. And I would look around and see other people trying to imitate what I was doing and not actually getting it, but they were blooming. And so this is one way to try and fight that white privilege, that subconscious bias. Go out of your way and support a business that is associated with a person of color. Encourage them so we feel that we don't just matter, but we actually are seen. That's what the big thing is, not being seen. I hope that answered your question a bit.
It did. Thank you so much. If anyone has any input, then I'm open to that. But it's given me a couple of ideas with who I reach out to in my own business and the skill set that I have as well, and maybe using that to fight. But I will take that on board. Thank you. I think Anthony wants to say something. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
I'm sorry. And Omar, I'm sorry if I cut you off, brother. I saw you kind of
move in the way. Yeah. I'll wait. Go on, Karen.
I'm sorry. Emma, what do you do for a living?
I'm a copywriter, brand consultant, but I also do a lot of speaking. A lot of the schools that I serve are schools filled with underprivileged kids, most of which are of minority ethnicities, Black, Asian. So I'm usually in that environment, usually the minority, but that's what I do on a daily basis.
Perfect. So the tip that I have actually is even more perfect than I even could have imagined. So I had a really, and again, guys, I've been on the outside. I had a really testy. So my co-founder of my business is also African-American. And we had a very testy, very uncomfortable debate. And towards the end of the debate, I made a statement that he was like, you know what, you're right. So I'm going to name a couple things. Nike, Facebook, I'll look around here. Jordan, what's this? Bubba, this water bottle, Apple. These are all brands that we buy and appreciate, and we know because they've done a great job with their branding and their communications for us to know it. It's so deeply entrenched in our subconscious that we don't have to consciously make a decision to buy these products. We know that they're great. We know that these products are top of the line and built well and will give us what we need. What I said to my co-founder, because he's very much in the nonprofit space, I said, nonprofits, I said, are there any nonprofits that are doing the work and unpacking the bias and the subconscious? And he's like, there's tons. And I said, why don't I know about them? And he said, what do you mean? He said, why can't I go down the street right now? Why can't I go downstairs and talk to my girlfriend right now? Why can't I call my mother? Why can't I call my friend? Why don't the everyday American, everyday, where are you guys from again? I'm sorry. The UK? Right?
Yeah, UK.
Why can't the everyday person know about these brands, right? These initiatives, the work. And so if you're in that space, what I want you to do is I want you to take a very tactical marketing, branding, business approach that Apple has clearly taken, that Jordan brand has clearly taken, that Facebook has clearly taken. And whether it's podcasting, whether it's writing, whether it's collaborations, whether it's reaching out and doing influencer marketing, get incredibly business oriented and branding and marketing oriented around taking the conversations we're having to a bigger, consistent scale. Because what I told him is, I said, there's great work happening that you just, he rattled off a couple brands that are doing this, like nonprofits that are doing this great work. And then I kept hitting home with him. I said, brother, you're not getting my point. Why don't everyday people know about these initiatives? Everyday people know about all these other initiatives. And he finally met me where he's like, you know what, you're right. We probably could be doing a better branding job. We probably could be doing a better communications job. I'll give you a couple examples. And Alice, I told you about this. 13 Reasons Why and Euphoria are two shows right now at the global scale that are speaking on mental health, depression, drug use for the younger demographic. They also tackle racism. They also tackle biases towards people that are gay, or people that have different outlooks on sexuality, but they do it in an entertaining, cool, creative, thoughtful way that younger people can really resonate with. Because let's call it what it is, guys. Most of us are probably in our 20s, 30s, and 40s. We need to get the messaging down to Valentina, your son, 4-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds. We need to get the messaging down there. So nonprofits and for-profits that are doing great work here, if you are in this space, think of ways that you can really use your expertise to increase the messaging and communications and branding and make it new, make it 2020, make it cool, make it interesting, but still delivering home important information. Because kids, and most people, unfortunately, don't want to sit on thoughtful panels like this. Unfortunately, most people don't want to listen to super thoughtful, interesting podcasts. Most people are so surface and so basic and so I'll stop there because I probably can start getting disrespectful. Certain people don't think that deeply, right? And we have to think of things like Euphoria and 13 Reasons Why and other initiatives and other collaborations and other partnerships to make this more of an interesting branding conversation that organizations that are doing great work in this space can take advantage of. So if you are in that space and you do have that skill set, I would think about how you can use that rant I just gave to your advantage to help out some of these organizations.
So Anthony, you mentioned about tokenism, and quite a good segue considering what you've just spoken about, but are there any companies out there at the moment that you think are jumping on the bandwagon and some that are really trying to create change? Because it's a very difficult thing, because we also see this in mental health, don't we? Whenever there's a mental health day, all of a sudden everyone's talking about the fruit they give, yoga classes, and now we've got the same, where I know a few people who've spoken to me have said, what we're doing, I don't agree with, but that's what the company are trying to do. So have you seen any specific companies that you think they're doing well, or nah? I'll
wait 6 months. That's, and again, and I don't want to bring that energy, but that's the energy I have to bring, because I know it doesn't, human beings don't change like that.
Yeah.
Your behaviors, the way that you work doesn't change like that. So the brands that are doing it right now, I applaud you. I love you. I thank you so much. I saw Nike put out a great ad. I saw Facebook did a thing. I saw Twitter CEO donated a bunch of money. Talk to me in 6 months. Talk to me in 18 months. Talk to me in 2 years. Let's see what type of diversity and inclusion initiatives that you're really embedding inside of your organization. Let's see where you're putting your money. Let's see what your branding looks like. Let's see what you do in 6 months. I'm sorry that I'm being kind of controversial and aggressive, but it irritates me when people do what's hot for right now.
Yeah.
So let's all talk in 6 months and see if we can talk about some brands that are now doing some cool things. Let's see if they're really doing it 6 months from now.
Okay, fantastic. Question from Anne-Marie.
Hi. First, I just wanted to thank all the panelists. I think it's been really interesting to hear sort of the lived experiences. And Anthony, I kind of share your cynicism. I think a lot of companies and brands are sort of jumping on it because it will cost them money if they don't say something now. So how do we ensure that to get the systemic change across the board, that we keep that pressure and keep the momentum on those companies to make sure they actually do deliver, not just like the blurb and the PR spin? How do we make sure that actually it's going to cost them money not to make this like a part of the inherent culture?
Hey, Omar, let me toss it to Omar. I've talked a lot here. Let me toss it to Omar. I'll give him some love. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, so it is about strategic change, and one of the one of the counterintuitive points is diversity is actually quite easy to do. Everyone, whether you're a CEO, whether you're working in an organization, there are processes that you do on a daily basis which can be inherently biased and can affect the diversity of an organization. And I think as a consumer, I think it's going to be quite difficult to implement that change. But where we can implement change is reaching out to people working within them organizations and asking them to have a look at their processes and make sure that they make them as diverse as possible. And I think if we go down that route, I think that's really the only way we're going to implement change. From a consumer, I think we're going to find it quite difficult. And I'm going to be with Anthony and be quite cynical on that, to be honest with you.
Shall I?
Yeah, Valentina.
Carry on.
Well, I'm going to take a bit of a diversity view here. And the truth is that companies go according to consumer trends. So while we may think that we haven't got much power over this, truth is we have, because we've got a buying power. And I made mention a while ago to a few people about how the rainbow color comes out, especially in clothing retail. And this is in support of gay rights movement. And we are all buying this. And when we buy it and the gay rights movement starts, it's about time to celebrate it, we're forced to have these conversations and we're forced to think about it. But the companies pushed this. And how did this get pushed? Because consumers kept talking about this. And this is the same kind of narrative we need to bring into this whole white privilege, anti-racism thing. We need to come out strongly and have a proper blackout when these companies step out. We need to show them where our buying is going towards. We need to show them what we think they should be doing, because face facts, face reality, you lead, not them. They don't tell you where to go, you tell them where you want to go. And if we can just stand up and stand firm and not act like being guilty of doing, go with trend and then let it die, and then let these companies go back to what they do and think, oh yeah, well, we stood up when it was time to be counted, but now we can go back to situation normal, then we lose the momentum. So it's up to us to keep the conversation going. It's up to us to push change. It's up to us to make sure it goes. So we don't have Gucci and all the other big brands coming up with designs where you have a black person with a round the neck of fashion design, but we can actually shut them up and show, yes, I think it's up to us, not up to them.
I think that's a really nice point, Valentina. It goes back to what we were saying before we came on about people taking the power back for themselves rather than waiting for systemic change. So like the statues being pulled down in Bristol, we were lobbying for that for decades, and then eventually we just, a bunch of people just said, fuck it, we'll just take it down now. And ultimately these brands will be impacted in their pockets rather than in their ideologies. So if we as consumers said, I'm going to educate myself on brands that are doing it well, and I'm going to support them with my money, and then we help educate others to that effect and say, I support these guys because they're doing good work. Over time, these are big issues we're talking about, but the more we're active about that and we're publicizing that, I think that could help move towards more positive change. Anthony, go for it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just really quickly, because I know me and Omar play in the same spaces, and I think you do as well, the other Omar, and Valentina, you play in this space as well. It's not enough, and again, I applaud, because she also asked them the question, what will be some of like the negative implications if brands don't do this? So it's not enough to write a check. It's not enough to black out your screen for a couple of days. It's not enough to have a couple weeks of this at a real level. So the work that we do here with E1B2, we go deep into, we call it the OS, the operational system, the employee experience structure, right? The policies, the workflows, the way of work, your recruiting structure, like those things need to change. Please. And again, I'm going to go out the limb here and just be super aggressive with it. Please don't just send $1 million check and then ghost. And there's nothing that happens at the policy and structure level and workflow level and recruiting level that changes. Please, I'm begging you, if you do that, no one else has to say it. I'll say it. Keep your money, keep your actions. Because I'm already seeing this happen. I have a couple colleagues that are part of companies that are doing this, and they have come out and said behind the scenes, yeah, we're doing this because it makes sense right now in the world that's happening right now. And we want to look like and be like those that are doing great things. And they told me, and I said, are there any policies that are changing? Any recruiting structures that are changing? Any ways of hiring and structuring? And like, is there anything changing at a real level? They said nothing. And that's the issue that, again, and besides this call here, I don't hear anybody talking about this. That's what irritates me. Why do we keep clapping for all these brands that are doing these amazing things, and we're not hearing about any true systemic change internally inside the organization? So let's clip this up. I know you're recording it. I may go on a whole thing there. Like, let's hold these brands accountable. Show me in 6 months, show me in 12 months that you actually have changed your policies and your structures to actually make a difference, not just write $1 million check because you think it's a nice thing to do. So,
yeah, I think I'd be more impressed by if we celebrated brands that were already doing this, like hadn't just started. Like we knew they'd already our policy.
Yep. Because there are companies out here that have already done this, right?
Yeah.
They don't have to like I have a little sister that goes to a school they've done this for 50 years. She goes to a private school. So they wrote out an email, and in the beginning of it says, you all know this is something we stand for, right? They've been doing it with their actions. They didn't have to wake up and know that this was something cool to do. So,
yeah.
Great point. Peter, you've had a few good questions. Let's come to you, Peter. What do you want to ask the panel?
Thanks, folks. Thanks, Omar. I agree with so many of the points here, but most passionately the fact that systemically corporations are just doing stuff at the moment, and that stuff is just things that are happening on top of a systemically racist, non-diverse, non-inclusive process. And so I've learned a lot because my company, Omar, I think you've previously interviewed my business partner, Annie Backer, and we're actually trying to work with companies to address that very fact that the processes they operate are not actually fit for purpose anymore, and we're never going to achieve full diversity, full inclusion without addressing that. So my question is about how we can extrapolate that into the wider society, and I think we've alluded to it already. I think we risk, there's lots of white faces on this call who want to be engaged, want to be here, want to be part of that. And if it stays like this, these debates risk becoming rhetorical. Great, lovely to be part of, but rhetoric and nothing else. So what do we do to reach the more reluctant white faces and get some of those people on here and get some of those reluctant white faces to talk about it? Because they're the people that need to hear what's been talked about on this call. Over and above the people like us who are already engaged and already passionately part of it. How do we reach more reluctant white people?
Yeah, I'll go with that. So everything that you're hearing on this call is, of Valentino and Anthony, both people, and myself, people of colour, and these are our lived experiences. These are experiences of having conversations with other people and facts, and it's all mixed together and it's all being presented to you guys. What you guys need to do now is, and this is everyone on the call, not just white people, everyone on the call, is take that information, do your own research, and formulate your own opinions and start a debate on it. Because I think within diversity and inclusion, it has been an echo chamber for far too long, and we need different people actually going out there, doing their research and challenging what we have to say. I mean, it's been great having Anthony on this call, because I think me and Valentino are actually quite similar in our thought process, but having Anthony adding something quite different and a different point of view, that's something that someone who's worked in diversity and inclusion for a number of years, we just don't have them conversations. So I guess to you, Peter, and to everyone on this call, what you need to do is go out there, have your own education, formulate your own views, and challenge people who work in diversity, who are sold on it, but then also challenge people outside of it as well.
Brilliant. I mean, just to add to that, I believe that there's passionately believe that there are millions and millions and millions and millions of other white people just in this country, let alone the rest of the world, who want to be engaged, who want to be part of that, but because of something around them, and especially maybe their white privilege doesn't allow them to see it yet, or they live in such a white privilege culture where it's not de rigueur, if that's the right phrase. It's not, you know, it's not what you do, you know, and we need to reach those people really quickly, you know, because otherwise we might risk waiting for another fucking tragic event to happen before it's peaking like this again, and we'd all be responsible, I think, if we allowed that to happen. So I hear all of that, and it's certainly things. So thank you, folks. Genuinely, it's something I will go and embed into not just what my business does, but you know, the people around me and everything that you know, everything I encounter. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for those points, Pete. I really enjoyed hearing you speak then. I just wanted to say quickly, if anybody does know of like any other events that are going on or any other discussions that they want to like promote so that other people can get involved in them, please do feel free to stick it in the chat, because I think, you know, knowledge is power. Anything else we can do. Whoa, that's a big comment coming in. I'll give that a read in a second. But honestly, if anybody does know of any other discussions, go on, Emma.
Right. We've mentioned about branding, we've mentioned about tokenism, about what we can do as individuals, but one thing we haven't discussed is how we can reform education. A lot of you will agree that we learned certain aspects in history, how great the empire was. We went around, we gave black and brown people railways, gave them democracy. Yes, we killed more people than the Nazis. Yes, we invented concentration camps, but we'll forget about that. But Daniel, who's also on the call, is working with kids, and you've got a few questions and a few thoughts on this, haven't you, Daniel?
I have, and I'm conscious of the time, so I'm trying to keep it fairly brief.
Don't worry about the time, mate. Don't worry.
I mean, I used to work in mainstream education, teaching English, and I now work for a charity working a lot with young people and internationally as well. So I spent a long time speaking about race and having, you know, quite complex conversations in my personal and private life. And then in the public space, in the workspace, it's much harder to move conversations past, you know, the kind of what I'd call the kind of racial basics, if for want of a better expression, you know, examples of racism, you know, why it's bad, trying to understand some of the basics with you know, with white people that don't understand, which is completely necessary. But for me, my question is more around kind of moving those conversations beyond that. So it would be mostly for you, Alice, as a white panelist, to say, like, how would you kind of almost vet your audience to say, well, when are we ready to move from these more basic principles of understanding to other things? Because I'm very conscious of, you know, I hate to be patronized. I hate to be forced to listen to things that I already know, you know, and I don't want to then do that to the people, especially the white people that I'm working with, by going over things that are already understood. So beyond the basic kind of, let me know where your thoughts are, what you know, what you've read, what you haven't, you know, it would more just be a kind of more kind of subtle and sophisticated indicators as to when and how you might move that forward, if that makes sense. I know it's not an easy question.
It's a really complicated question, in fact, actually. So yeah, I guess that's the thing, is you work with people with all different levels of competencies and understandings of the topic, aren't you? To me, this debate reminds me of when we talk about feminism and people's different understandings and opinions of feminism. So for me, one of the my biggest gripes as being a woman in business is when you go to a women in business event and that's all they tell you about it. They're like, we're here to talk about women in business. It's like, that's a freaking huge topic, let's be honest. How can it possibly, is it going to be for me, is it not for me? And I go along to a lot of them and it's very basic and it's very remedial, and they're talking about, oh, I've had barriers because I've been put down in my male dominated industry, and it strikes me as very basic. So I guess maybe it's a case of being more specific in marketing of events and talks and things. Like, I know we kept this one quite broad because I feel like race generally is quite a new discussion for quite a lot of people, and I know definitely for me it's like a very new discussion. But I guess going forwards it'd be nice to have more specialized events where we're talking about as an influential white person in business, or as a white CEOs, what can we be doing to create opportunities? Do you know what I mean? I feel like discussions need to be really tailored to be able to get the right kind of changes coming in, because otherwise we're going to be talking in two meta terms all the time. And you're right, we're going to be covering topics, you know, from ancient history. And it's important that we talk about colonialism and things like that, of course, but if we're going to get any kind of real change going on, we need to kind of get to the point. We need to be like, where are we today and what do we need to do going forward? And
just to clarify, it was in no way a criticism of this session at all. I think this is...
Oh, thank you. It's just something that, like, I was very aware of, like, when we were forming it. I was like, honestly, we could go in so many directions, and I wanted to kind of touch on a lot of different points and kind of make it a magazine style program almost, because, like I said, it's quite new for a lot of us, and it's nice to think about the complexity and the diversity of the issues. But going forward, I would really love to see that, and that'd be great if you know, we're an engaged audience here, so I really encourage anyone that's found this interesting today. You know, it's so easy to set up a free event on Eventbrite. I know I would definitely be seeking things like this out again to continue my education. So I don't know, Omar, maybe it's something we could talk about doing, actually, do like a spin-off monthly event or something. So we'll have a chat and put some, if we decide to do something to that effect, we'll put it in the follow-up email. But yeah, cool. Those are my thoughts anyway.
All right, well, we've got 2 more questions. I think we sort of sum up what we've learned and what we can do moving forward. Katie, you've got a good question about positive discrimination for the panel.
Yeah, it was touched upon earlier, and it's generally sort of, how does the panel feel about positive discrimination, especially with sort of organisations recruiting people or sort of putting people of colour sort of in the foreground of pictures, or whatever that may be, really. And sort of links to this as well, how do people feel about Alexis Ohana's resignation from Reddit earlier this week?
Who wants to jump in?
Yeah, which one of the panelists?
I'll jump in. So I'm not too sure about the Reddit one. I'm not up with the news on that, but definitely around the positive discrimination and positive action. So it's important to stay on the right side of the law here. You know, you can't recruit someone based on a restricted trait, essentially. So you need to be staying on the right side of the law. But from a personal point of view, I think we do need to be quite selective and take a positive action point of view. You know, we need to move away from equality and more towards equity, especially around the recruitment process.
Could you just explain what that means, Omar? Because this is a new term to me last week.
Yeah. So equality is giving everyone an equal chance. Equity is ensuring that people who have gone through different barriers have a leg up. So one of the big terms is around university and the attainment gap at university, where you know, I think it's about 15 to 20% difference between black students to receiving top level degrees. That's a 2-1 or a first to white people. So it's about doing subtle things like dropping your requirements down to, say, a 2-2 or a third, or whatever it is, to allow for them additional people to come through. Specific advertising and targeting of people of Black and Asian minority, specific targeting of women. I think that we need to go through that process, because if we just promote equality, we're not going to see much change. We're not going to see much change. The Equalities Act has been in since 2010, and we've not really seen much. We've seen 1 or 2 percentage changes in boardrooms at the top. So from my point of view, I'm working within recruitment. I definitely feel positive action is a route that we need to go to.
Cool. Valentina, you have any thoughts?
I'm going to say positive discrimination, in other words, stereotyping. And the thing to lead with will be empathy, but then we can say we can get to empathetic. So I'm going to ask, if you're a woman, simply by virtue of being a woman, does that mean you're a good cook? Or does that mean you're a good housekeeper? Just because you're a woman. So if you spend your time thinking about how you'd like to be treated, how would you treat others? Would you stereotype them? Just because you're black and tall, you must be good in basketball. The thing is, your child, just because mommy or daddy is good or excels at certain things, that doesn't mean the child will do the same thing. And that's a big way to tackle it. And we're all talking about it's a big thing already, stereotyping and people saying, don't do this, and I don't want to be boxed into this, I am this kind of person. And unfortunately, it's such a huge conversation that opens a lot of canker. At the bottom of it all, think about it empathetically. Would you like to be classed in a certain way simply because of who you represent?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going to go. I don't have too much to say about this. I haven't thought too much about it, so I tend to not try to say anything if I'm not going to bring super value to the table on this topic. But I would push brands and people to kind of individualize the experience, right? I know for me, I know both things. I know certain African Americans and people of color that appreciate the adjusting of standards or shining the light on the fact that they don't have as much opportunities. For instance, the NFL has this rule now where you have to interview a certain amount of African Americans here. And I know a lot of African American coaches that think that's a good thing. I know certain people also of color that probably are a little bit more competitive and don't see race as much of a thing in their mind personally, that are like, I'm just a person. Like, just make sure that your process of hiring someone or your process of delivering a reward is flat across the board. And if the best person for the job is not me, let it be what it is. Like, let meritocracy rule all. Like, because I'm kind of like I wouldn't want to get a job just because. And I'm trying to, like, I don't know if I would want to get an opportunity just because of the skin of my skin color. And standards were adjusted for that. For me personally, I would want to get an opportunity because I'm the best person for the job, and the person making the decision doesn't see color either and is clearly hiring off of that same perspective as well. Now, again, that's literally a perfect world that we do not live in, but that's just one man's point of view on. I don't know how I would feel if certain things that I got in life were adjusted based off of the lack of opportunities that culturally we are given. I don't know how I don't know. I don't know is my answer, really.
I share your confusion, Anthony, because I'm worried about tokenism is something I really worry about, because as much as we're talking about we have to support people who are disadvantaged and who have more barriers acting against them. I was talking with my team earlier in the week about this. How can we create opportunities for more voices to be heard, including people of color? But then how do you even advertise that without making it look like, oh, we just want to get black people involved for the sake of it? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a very fine line, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a weird thing I don't even really have an answer to, because on one end, it's like, I'm so happy that I see this happening. On the other end, it's like, do you really view me as competent? Do you really view me as the best person for this job? Do you really view me as the best person to do what needs to be done? Or are you only doing it for the status quo? Are you only doing it to check the box that you said you would check to be politically correct?
Yeah, I wonder if Omar has any insights on that, because you talk about diversity and inclusion. So how do we avoid tokenism? Is there a way of doing it, or do we just have to be a bit messy with it in the first instance just to bridge the gap?
This Omar, yeah. Just to make sure.
Sorry, I motivate.
You need to Omar J or Omar Al.
Right, easier.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I personally don't really have a problem with positive action, and even tokenism, although it is, it can be perceived quite negatively. It has got a space. One of the things is with people in general, they'll aspire to different levels if they see someone like themselves at a senior position. So within, for example, Goldman Sachs at the moment, what they've announced is, well, they announced it a few months ago, is that whenever an IPO, if they're going to manage someone's IPO, they have to have one Black or Asian or minority board member. And that reeks of tokenism. But what it does, it also causes positive action. It causes the companies who are then wanting to go through Goldman Sachs to make sure that they do have a diverse member on their board. And the long-term effects will be there'll be more Black, Asian women on boards, and I personally believe that's the way that we have to go. We sort of need to. We're in a position where we sort of need to force the issue a bit, and it's going to be uncomfortable at the start. And the people who are going to them senior leaders need to accept that. That there may be an element of that, but the follow up will be that the people coming through behind them, that they're breaking the glass ceiling to allow the people from behind them to come through as well.
So one thing I'd like to add, if we're talking on a meritocratic positive discrimination side footing, Yale University, they positively discriminate in terms of they have a lowest Black students going to Yale for law, they have to get not as much as the white counterparts. But then what they did is that they did a study after this to look at how far in their careers they got to and where were they. Was there any sort of sign that they were underhanded in the workplace? They actually found that the Black students who had to score lower to go to university, it made no effect in the workplace, that they would be at the same level as their white counterparts or higher. So it comes back to what you're saying about equality and equity. Sometimes equality of opportunity is not the right thing, but it's incredibly nuanced, isn't it? That we have to look at this from both sides of it. As Anthony said, how would you feel if you got something because of the colour of your skin? You'd want it on the merit of who you are, but at times we've got to look at this from, I suppose, a holistic point of view. Which is quite an interesting paper. I'll find that and make sure that's emailed to everyone, because it's a really interesting read about positive discrimination and how it can endear people in later on within their working career. Steve, you've had a few things that you want to discuss, haven't you? And we'll probably make this the last one as we are running over time before we wrap it all up. But yeah, Steve, so what would you like to put to the panel?
Okay, Mal, thank you. Right, first of all, I have to say my sort of thinking is definitely near Anthony. We've got to look at the psychology side of it. But my question is really going to be towards how we approach engaging locally, especially on social media. And I kind of want to give a little bit of experience I've had over the last 10 days. I've been very active for the first time in the 53 years of my life. And I'm not going to give the reasons behind that, but I have. So from a white person point of view, I know what another white person is thinking and what their defense wall is coming up. But I have the advantage of giving a kind of a life coaching point of view as well, and not engaging in anything negative. In these last 10 days, while I've been engaging with people, they have a resistance to not listen. They're resistance because they've had whatever years they've had behind them of what they've understood. It's the Snow White story. And most of these people, you've been able to just say to them, just please read, but don't argue with them. Don't go into their actual statements that they are making about all lives matter. Don't get into that. Just say, well, just read why I'm saying this to you. That's all I'm asking you. So I'm asking them to commit to one thing. If they read that, they commit to one thing. 9 out of 10 people have worked and done, and it happens. It's like having the sales. You're selling something and you go, right, yeah, great, sold. And it's a great feeling. But 10 days of that, I am really tired. Tired mentally, my mental health. I noticed straight away, I thought, whoa, I've got to do something here, and mental health. Now that's 10 days. For anyone who's there who's white, and I don't need to say for people of color, can you imagine if I'm tired in 10 days, what it's like to live with that for the rest, all your life? And I thought to myself, wow, I can't go through like this and do this, because that's just really hard. So my question is, how would you engage so you're not enticing any argument, you're just trying to get across to them the best way without using trigger words like, what would you use before? Ignorance and white privilege. These are the first words not to use straight away. But my question is, if you're going to engage with someone who is going to use words like all lives matter and go on in that conversation, what's the best way for you?
I offer an insight from a conversation I had yesterday, because I've found it really difficult, because obviously, well, not obviously, but in my group of friends, of white friends, I should say, I think we haven't really ever spoken about race, and I've been quite surprised with some of the comments that I've heard from some people. So I had one last night where someone was talking about the protests in America specifically, and they were saying, yeah, but you know, it's all over the top and it doesn't affect us over here. And I was like, well, it does, because police brutality is awful and we need to take a stance against it, and it's indicative of like a larger problem. And he kept coming back to, yeah, but it's like that one guy in America. And I was like, no, it's actually like indicative of like a larger anger. And just whatever he was saying, I wasn't saying it to be obnoxious. I was dealing with it with humor, and I was like, yeah, but actually there's this, and actually there's that. And it was just like, just adding little bits to the conversation, because I didn't know how much research he'd done, but from the way he was speaking, I assumed it was not very much. So I don't think there's any harm in challenging your friends. And I think there's actually more power in that sometimes, of standing up to people that you respect and that you love, because they know you're not coming at it to be critical, because they, you know, you've got a history with your friends, haven't you? So I don't think, like for me, I don't handle things aggressively. I try not to argue directly with people unless they really bring it out of me. But it's more to, I come at it from an education point of view. I'll say things like, well, based on some research that I did yesterday, I found such and such. Or I'll say, you know, I used to think that, but I found since then. So it's not like you're trying to shout someone down. I don't think shouting people down is very helpful in discussions like this, especially when it's quite emotive. That's just my personal perspective. I think Anthony said that earlier about using empathy, and I think empathy and understanding to try and kind of come together in a move in the same direction, rather than saying, no, you're wrong, and shouting someone down. For me, that doesn't work as an approach.
So the work that I do in the employee experience space, I use this term called emotional glue. Let me give you a little bit of a background. So a lot of leaders, and you guys know this, a lot of leaders try to use what I like to call tactics in the world of employee experience, which is a very deep, wide bucket. They use tactics, right? Adjusting policies, adjusting structures, workflows, whatever the case is going to be. They use these tactics without having buy-in and trust and emotional glue with the employee base. I have been on the record of really being against surveys, right? And everyone said, why? There's so many companies that are, you know, really successfully using surveys. And I've always tried to explain to them that unless...
Please make sure you're muted.
Can you guys mute everybody? Is that possible?
Yeah.
The long story short is I've always tried to explain to a brand that you don't think there's moments when someone's filling out a survey and they're just checking the box and not being thoughtful about it. But if you have a little bit of an emotional glue with that person, a connection, a relationship with that person, they'll feel a little bit more accountable to be respectful, to be empathetic, to really be thoughtful about how they answer that survey question. And every time I've asked that question, a brand leader said, of course. We would have much more true answers from the survey if we had that emotional glue. So I'll take that example to this conversation. If the conversations are emotionally draining because you're being faced with people that are, again, whether it's they're naive, they're ignorant, they're disrespectful, they're tone deaf, they're sensitive to certain things, I would ask everyone to only start having conversations with people that they first built that emotional glue with. Because when you have emotional glue, when you have that bond of connection, when the conversation gets a little hesky, a little hot, a little tight, you guys can fall back into a place of love. Because that's exactly what happened with me and my mother, me and my co-founder. We would pause ourselves when we found ourselves creeping up to 10, we would go back to a place of love and recenter. And so I think that's what's not happening, which is everyone's trying to push out communications and have thoughtful conversations with people they haven't first done the hard work of digging deep and having empathy and understanding who they are at a person level, at a human level, and building that trust. Because as soon as you build that trust, that's when you can start to make bold, direct statements that they really can appreciate it and wrap their head around. And the response to your bold or deep statement won't be as aggressive or won't be as negative. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but if the conversations are starting to get a little bit exhausting, maybe ask yourself, and everyone ask themselves, and be a little bit more strategic about who you have the conversations with from a timing perspective, and build the relationship first to be able to have the trust and the respect to go deep. So I don't know if that was helpful, but.
No, definitely. I think that's a great point, that before we engage in these tougher conversations with people, we need to see what binds us together, so we've got that to fall back onto. Because I think I've been having very difficult conversations with a few people and fallen out with a couple of people about this as well. So yeah, Alice, any last words?
I just really want to thank you guys. I appreciate we've stayed a little bit over time, so thank you so much for your patience with that. But I just want to say a huge thank you. Like, honestly, I was really delighted that so many people signed up, but even more delighted to see how active you've all been in the conversation as well. This is the most active group chat I think I've seen on a Zoom call probably throughout lockdown, and I don't just mean the ones I've been hosting, but yeah, really lovely to hear all your points of view. I appreciate we're all coming with lots of different lived experiences, and I really appreciate the insights you've all brought to it. So extra special thank you to the panel. You've all been incredibly kind and generous with your insights, but thank you as well to everyone that's attended and for being so engaged and vibrant and wonderful humans, really.
So just to sum up, let's start holding brands accountable. Let's see what they do in 6 months, a year, 18 months time, not just now. Let's keep protesting. Let's keep the conversation going. And let's do it with love as well. Let's see what binds us before we start having these tougher conversations, and keep protesting, people. Revolution's coming.
Let's go topple some patriarchy. Thank you so much. I'll follow up with a follow-up email to you all tomorrow, so please look out for that. But otherwise, have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Yes.